Hey there, happy Friday. Normally I do these politics videos on the weekend, on a Saturday, but with the holiday weekend, the polls have really kind of come out. I'm not expecting more polling data to come out today on Christmas Day in the US. So I thought I would use the time to make a video updating you on the most recent results of that polling data and where I see the race. Now, what I want to do in this video is explain why I think that we are now I'm going to go out and on a limb and say that I think there is a very good chance Trump is going to, if not take the nomination outright, be the person with the most delegates by the time the convention comes around. And I'm saying that mostly based on not any particular polling result, but because of the structures of the race, the way that the various other campaigns are behaving and reacting to the Trump phenomenon. And I'm going to do all that in this video. And in order to keep it under an hour, I'm going to then do a second video where I'm going to go through several articles on the race that informed my assessment and that I would recommend you check out if you're quite interested in being a nerd and a geek like me and following the GOP race. So let's go ahead and take a look at the most recent polling data and some of the other analysis that I've done this week. Before we just start with the numbers, I'm going to say I've done in this presentation a Dr. Winter's health check for the campaigns, giving every campaign my assessment in terms of their strengths and weaknesses and where they're going to be going. And those, of course, are going to be informed on how the candidates are doing on the 4 M's: money, machinery, momentum, and message. I don't make that explicit in the slides, but that's what I'm using to make those assessments. And on all of those issues, money, machinery, momentum, and message, the articles I'll be doing in the second video will illuminate those and the strengths and weaknesses of the various campaigns. All right, let's swap over and get going with the data analysis. Woo! Best part of the week, right? Okay, so sorry here. Let me just find my PowerPoint presentation. Where'd you go? Oh, now you guys get to see my nice holiday background, very wintry, of a wintry look to my desktop this year. Alrighty dighty. So this is my analysis on how Trump can win the GOP nomination. The first thing we're going to look at is the national polling average. And there were a few polls that were released that went up to the 21st of December, and that's why I've done this hangout, because if we didn't have new data, I wouldn't waste your time, but we do. And the trends that we're seeing now have really shaken out from where we were, let's say, 4 weeks ago, when there was sort of a bunched up, crowded amount of candidates right here with Carson, Cruz, and Rubio all kind of converging, their various paths converging. We can see that Trump continues to solidify his national lead. In the last video I mentioned I would be curious, if he was going to be able to break his ceiling. He has broken his ceiling, and he's also managed to maintain it. Now, of course, there's always going to be a little bit of variation. You can see how these things kind of go up and down. So you want to look at the general trend line, and that's a nice trend line to have. That going up trend line is what a candidate wants to have when it comes to looking at polling, as opposed to Ben Carson. You can see where his trend line is going down. Now, there are times that Carson in the past has plateaued a little bit before, say, falling again. And you can see from Carson's number here, while he was up in second place back in November, he's now down to 10%, but this is starting to flatline too. And this is a trend that I will be watching, because one of the questions that I think now will influence, especially Iowa, is the extent to which Carson supporters stick with Carson, even despite his various limitations as a candidate, and to what extent they continue to abandon him. We know that the person who benefits most in Iowa from Carson going down in the polls is Ted Cruz. And he's now very much broken away into his own tier. Ted Cruz is now, he's 17 points behind Trump, but he does get that silver medal in terms of national support. And that's important for Cruz because of the momentum factor. If there's a momentum behind his campaign, then there's a perception that he is more of a winner than, say, a Marco Rubio. And we'll compare Marco's numbers now. You can see that Marco had a little bit of I think there was a small debate bump he had and I've constantly mentioned that his weakness as a candidate, his inability to capitalize on the opportunities presented to him. And again, national polls will not determine the outcome, but they are a bit of a thermometer in terms of where the voters are. And Rubio just is not catching fire. We are now, I think the last time I saw was 40 days away to the first caucuses. It might be 39 now, whatever it is, minus minus February 1st, whatever number of days that is. The idea that, well, of course in politics something can always happen. But given these trend lines, I don't understand I think Marco Rubio's people should be more concerned, quite concerned. And in the second video that I'll do separately, I'll look at an article from Politico talking about Marco Rubio trying to reassure his donors that everything is fine in a similar way that King of the Numpties, Jeb Bush, also tries to convince his donors that what has he got, 4.4%? in the national polls. Well, I mean, officially Carson now is King of the Numpties. He's taken over that position from Jeb Bush, but still, for a candidate that's spent millions, literally millions of dollars, that is just that's such a sad little number. And then we have a little bump here for Christie, but here's what I would caution in the articles I'm going to recommend to you. Sometimes the media focuses way too much on changes in the polls that are within the margin of error. For instance, I think one of the articles says that last time in the poll, Jeb got 6% and Christie got 4%, and now in this time around, it's Christie who is 6% and Jeb who has 4%. That 2-point difference is within the margin of error. That's just noise. So really a 1-point difference, 2-point difference, not such a big deal unless it's part of a trend. If you get 1 point after 1 point after 1 point, you're going up like Trump is here, that's a trend line. But if it's just a slight variation within the margin of error and it's a one-off poll, that to me isn't evidence of anything important. Not to say that it won't become important, but a single shift of a few points that are within the margin of error, that could really just be put down to variation in the sample, not real changes in people's preferences in the population. Now, moving on to Iowa, we can see that Ted Cruz here is definitely best positioned, and he's, in some ways, he was where Carson was, but a little bit better. So when Carson hit his peak, he hit about 28.5%. I would estimate that to be 27.5%. I can't quite, that's a 5-point difference there. So he's actually now surpassed by a little bit where Carson was when he was in first place in Iowa, which is very interesting, of course. But you can see that in the last few polls, he's had the same numbers. Now, again, this is just 2 observations we have. Most recently, one on the 7th that went from the 14th to the 17th of December, and the 18th to the 21st of December. In those, Cruz, I guess, you've got the average rolling here. So we had the CBS News poll put him at 40. That's quite high when you look at how he's performing in the other polls. So again, if you look at these in terms of the dates, the 13th, you got 25%, 31%, 31%. 40 is a bit of an outlier. I'm not saying that that's not where the voters in Iowa are going. I just wouldn't be willing to say that Ted Cruz is on his way to hitting 40% unless I start to see 36s, 37, 38s in other polls that come out in between now and the end of January. Carson continues his downward slide, and the farther down Carson goes, I really do think it's to Cruz's benefit. And I pointed this out in the last video, this nice X where you can sort of see as Carson descends, Cruz goes up, really benefits most powerfully from Carson defectors. As long as that trend continues, then Cruz should see his lead expand. However, if Carson has now hit his floor, and he's going to have a base of about 10% support, and he can hold those people all the way through the caucuses, I think the person that hurts the most is Ted Cruz. So Ben Carson getting out of the race for Iowa would most powerfully benefit Ted Cruz, in my opinion, based on these numbers. But if he stays in the race, then Cruz can't pick up, say, like another 10 points. Of course, you know, if you win Iowa, whether you win it by 1 vote or you win it by 10%. But, you know, so how big that gap is between Cruz and Trump is not necessarily, I guess, such a big thing unless Cruz really takes a surprise victory and crushes Trump. And I don't see that happening. There's a lot of speculation in the media as to whether or not Trump voters will have the motivation to go to, in the dead of winter on a dark night, to a high school auditorium and sit for hours to do the caucusing. And when I see the enthusiasm of Trump voters in focus groups, I have no doubt that these people are ready to go to the caucuses and stay there and make sure that their candidates' positions are advocated for and that their candidate does well. Can Marco Rubio do the same? Well, he's trending down here at about 11%. He's just ahead of Carson and Bush, again, for all of his, Iowa's not necessarily his most natural base, but he's still at 5%, which is really not good. So again, status quo. I think it would be the top 3 will be Cruz, Trump, and Rubio. And I'm not putting, I'll just say that that's not the order. I'm reading it in order of the polls, but I don't necessarily think that Ted Cruz is a sure bet in Iowa. I think, because I won't underestimate Donald Trump, to be honest, he's not really turned his fire against Cruz yet. That being the case, sorry, I'm just going to clear my throat here. That being the case, I don't want to predict that Cruz isn't going to be harmed by a Trump attack. And we know that even if Iowa isn't necessarily the most natural fit for Trump, as in terms of a constituency, the demographics of the state, he still seems willing to fight for every single state and be a winner everywhere. He's not willing to sort of discount Iowa the way Bush has in order to concentrate on New Hampshire. And I'm saying Rubio coming in 3rd just because he is the best of he's performing better than any other establishment candidate, and I don't see reasons in the next 4 weeks for people to suddenly really change their minds about Jeb Bush or John Kasich. So that being the case, he kind of wins by default. In New Hampshire, we're seeing, again, the most the most powerful factor, the thing that stands out the most, is that Trump is just so far ahead. He's up over 13 points and his nearest rival. And there is a really big battle going on for 2nd place in New Hampshire. And one of the things I will point to later on in the slides is this. I just think it's crazy the way that the 2nd-tier candidates are more obsessed with fighting each other than the front runner. That people aren't turning their fire against Trump, really. Instead, they're choosing to battle for the first place loser. You get the winner, and then you get first place loser and second place loser and third place loser. And none of these people seem to want to win New Hampshire outright. Again, a lot could change in the next 5 weeks, but what I see is a pretty solid base of Trump voters who will go to the polls and support their candidate because they're frustrated, they're motivated, they're sick of the establishment, and this is their chance to express their opinion. And then down here, you've got the establishment candidates all battling for the same piece of the pie. So you have Rubio, you have, well, not so much Cruz, but you've got Christie, you've got Jeb Bush down here, and is this, I think, John Kasich, is that him in blue? You've got all the establishment candidates basically fighting for 2nd place. If Ted Cruz can get a 2nd place finish in New Hampshire, that would be very, very impressive. I don't think he can do that. I don't think New Hampshire is naturally a Ted Cruz state. So who comes in 2nd will have a big impact on which establishment candidate might be seen as the person around whom others could rally to be an anti-Trump alternative. So now, to keep this again under 30 minutes or around 30 minutes if I keep babbling, I want to do a Dr. Winter's GOP campaign health check. And we're going to go in order of the national polls in descending order from first to last. Trump right now is controlling his own destiny. He is not spending his own money. He's living off the land in terms of free media, being in a news headline generation machine. He is, maintaining the excitement around his campaign, the focus on his campaign, and engaging with his own supporters, speaking their truths in a way that keeps them engaged, and they're not leaving him, they're not abandoning him. If anything, the GOP as a whole seems to be coming to terms with the idea of Trump as their nominee, which is not at all, of course, what the establishment wants. And in another video, I don't have time to go into the details of a poll this week because there was so much in terms of news that I wanted to bring attention to. So I'll go in depth into one of the particular surveys that went out into the field recently in another video. But you see that they rate him high on his ability to deal with immigration, to deal with the economy, to deal with national security. He just, to pun on his name, he trumps all the other GOP candidates in terms of his leadership and competence. And no one so far is willing to put their money behind attack ads to try to bring him down. Now recently, I think it was yesterday, George Will wrote an article saying that the GOP needs to take on Trump and try to bring him down. But the kind of people who support Donald Trump are not going to be persuaded by George Will. George Will's audience is people who already agree with George Will. And as the next video will show, the establishment is really in trouble. And what I'm going to use to demonstrate that is I want to look at a slide that examines how much each candidate has spent versus where their poll position is, where they are in the polls. And what you'll see is that more often than not, it's establishment candidates who are spending big money and seeing no return. So the kinds of voters that are participating in the GOP race are quite amenable to a Cruz, to a Trump, to an anti-establishment candidate, and I don't see them changing their views. So the other reason why Trump is in an excellent position is that the lower tier candidates are all too busy attacking each other in a fight for second place. Recently, Jeb Bush, who is feeling threatened by Chris Christie, has started going after him. As I mentioned, his vulnerability on the downgrading of the credit ratings, his inability to properly manage highway transportation funds to address public transportation needs. Bush is now going after Christie on those things, and Christie, while having a nice positive couple weeks with being endorsed by some newspaper and some important Republicans in New Hampshire, has not really been the subject of negative ads yet. And Jeb is now turning his attention. I guess he's also fighting Rubio and not really paying attention to Kasich, but he's going after both. He's gone after both Rubio now and Christie in an attempt to try to shore up the establishment segment of the GOP base in New Hampshire. So while all of these lower tier candidates are busy attacking each other, none of them are attacking Trump. So given this, why would anyone think Trump isn't going to come out first, or at least second, where they're proportional delegates from now until the 15th of March. And when it comes to the 15th of March, a lot of campaigns will have run out of money. They will not be able to compete in multiple states at the same time. And Trump, not having spent any of his money, will be able to flood the airwaves and make sure that his voters get out, his supporters are identified, and that he can win a plurality of the vote in order to win 100% of the delegates after the 15th of March. So, the reason why I see Trump winning is because of what is happening with the other candidates and the structure of the campaign that is moving forward. And unless that structure changes, I don't see why the outcome would change. It's like physics. If you drop a ball from 5 feet and you do it over and over again under the same conditions, you're going to get the same result. As long as the second-tier candidates are too busy fighting each other and not fighting Trump, then nothing is going to change. As long as Trump continues to control his own destiny, unless he messes it up for himself, and that seems impossible, then nothing is going to change. So again, ceteris paribus, I now feel that I could start to say that, yes, I see Trump taking, if not the nomination, then at least having the most delegates going into it. All right, so let's move on to second place person. That's Ted Cruz. Now, with Cruz's momentum in Iowa, there is, I think, a growing expectation that he is going to win Iowa, or he'll have to win Iowa, because if he doesn't, it'll be a sign of weakness, and it will hurt his perception, the perception of his viability as a candidate, if he doesn't win Iowa. If he comes in second to Donald Trump in Iowa, then where does he win? New Hampshire? No. South Carolina, he's not threatening Trump in the data that I've seen. Obviously, we'll see more South Carolina data in the spring as the election their approaches. And Cruz, unlike Trump, who controls his own destiny, seems to be a bit more dependent upon converting Carson voters. And we haven't really seen where Carson's bottoming out yet. So we'll watch that as it continues. And as I said before, Cruz's problem that I see, the biggest problem he has is that, yes, he can certainly win Iowa, but where does he go after that? And maybe there'll be more media coverage. Maybe we'll see some more polling data coming out of later states where he is showing some strength, but I don't see it in the data yet. So I think that, if I were on the Ted Cruz strategy team, that the strategy I would recommend would be to collect as many delegates as possible when the races are proportionally, the delegates are given out by proportion of how much vote you received in that race. So that even if, when it comes to the 15th of September, if Cruz can't win a winner-take-all state, he can still walk into the convention with a fair proportion of delegates behind him. And because I also predict Trump will not have enough delegates to win outright, he will then be best placed to negotiate for, and I said this in a previous video, I think a Trump-Cruz ticket makes a lot of sense. And we'll see if that is where the party ends up. Now, Rubio, Kasich, Christie, and Bush all have pretty much the same problem. They have to win somewhere. They absolutely need to come in first, ideally, because even coming in second, if you're going to come in second, 17 points behind Donald Trump, that's not really coming in second. So Rubio has a challenge. He has to win somewhere, but where? He's not winning Iowa, he's not winning in New Hampshire, and he's not doing all that great in terms of, being in second place and challenging Cruz in South Carolina. So while he's running a national campaign and saying that, he's going to be visiting Iowa and getting out delegates and doing all this stuff, I just don't see him catching up with Cruz in any meaningful way. And then where does he go from there? So he has the same problem, as I said, as Bush and Christie and Kasich. They are fighting for the same smaller pool of establishment voters, and as a consequence, they're splitting them up, and therefore that helps Donald Trump get a plurality of the votes, which means he will, be declared the winner. I really don't see a clear path to victory for Rubio based on the race where it stands right now and the dynamics that we've talked about. Okay. So some of these, again, might be a little bit repetitive, but that's because all of the establishment candidates are facing the same problem. Chris Christie's put all his eggs in the New Hampshire basket. But again, where does he go from there? Where can he win? South Carolina? Christie had a small bump in the polls, but we'll see if that lasts when negative ads start hitting him and reminding people of the things that they don't like about him. He again is fighting for that same pool of voters, and even if he were to win New Hampshire, where does he go next? I just don't see a natural constituency for Christie in the states, outside of the Northeast. And the next time that he has an opportunity to have a demographic like New Hampshire is pretty far down the line. Jeb Bush, talk about a waste of money. Jeb Bush's campaign has been a complete waste of literally millions of dollars. He has the same desperate need. He has to win somewhere. And yet everywhere he's in single digits. He's fighting for the same voters as Rubio, Christie, and Kasich. And, if he doesn't win Iowa, he doesn't win New Hampshire, he doesn't win South Carolina, where does he win? I don't see where he can win. And that's why, again, I don't see anything stopping Trump's running away with this race. Next up, we have, everybody else. So there are some people in the GOP who just need to accept that the voters, they're just not into you. And those people would be Carson, Fiorina, Paul, Huckabee, Pataki, and Santorum. I think that's everybody who's running still. I think that's where the remainder of the race is, because these people are so irrelevant. The one that does stand out is Carson. Carson's impact in Iowa on Cruz's ability to take that victory is really the only thing I see that could influence a race. If Carson were to get out, that would, in Iowa at least, and maybe in South Carolina a bit, strengthen Cruz's hand. But the rest of these people, the voters, they're just not that into you. And the sooner they accept it and move on with their lives, I think the happier they'll be. Right, okay, that's it. That's the end of my slideshow. So let me get out of this and come back and tell you a little bit more about where, what the next video is going to be. So in the next video, I want to go over several articles that are really good, mostly from Politico, but I want to spend a bit of time on the Vox article that compared polling position with spending. Because again, I think it shows the weakness of the establishment and the absolute that this is not an establishment voter year. The establishment this time is really struggling, and again, I don't see any reason for that to change in the next few weeks. So this is really the year of the anti-establishment GOP voter. It's like we had Year of the Woman back in '92. Well, I think 2016 is the year of the anti-establishment GOP voter. And that is going to wrap it up for this episode. For anyone who wants to stick around, I'm literally going to turn this one off, get the video for the next one ready, and start it up right away. So if you just refresh the page on my channel in the next like 5 minutes, you'll see me again. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to keep going, I will, when the video comes out, I will put a link to part 2, and you can head right over and keep watching without interruption. And I know today's Christmas Day, so there's not much to do usually in the afternoon if you do celebrate Christmas with family and friends. In the evenings, you know, there's not always a lot to do, and the Sunday talk shows, I don't know if they're going to be so good this week. So if you're really addicted to politics, this is your little bit of a political fix to get you through until next week, when, you know, all the political analysis will start up again. So if you enjoyed this, go ahead and sub to my channel. I'll be doing videos on the GOP race all the way through the convention, and then once the convention is over, I will be covering the general election race right through November, and then probably doing some kind of year wrap-up video at the end of November. So if you enjoyed this, please do sub. Otherwise, thank you for watching to the end of the video. I've been Christy. You've been awesome, and I'll see you really, really soon. Bye.